Hello everyone, welcome back to Adventures of the Mind. I am your host, as always, James W. Jesso. This episode is another Psychedelic Café. The Psychedelic Café is a conversational technology that was born into existence by Jean Robertson and her work with the Liminal Space Agency, a meta-monastery here in Kitchener, Ontario. She called it Dharma Talking, and I call it the Psychedelic Café to, well, stay on brand with the podcast. She has been on the show previously. I have included a link to the episode with Jean in the show notes. Her work is fantastic, and I highly recommend checking it out. Today's episode, however, harnesses the power of that conversational technology to explore the question of what does the psychedelic experience offer us insofar as the meaning of being in relationship. Now you might be asking, what is this technology? As in, like, how does it work? Well, it's a structured conversation that goes about in 3 stages. The first stage is that each person goes around like in a digital circle and shares one clear, coherent thought on the question. The second phase is sort of an open free-for-all, a non-narrativized discussion that merges wherein a narrative and trajectory within the conversation around this question emerges almost through dead reckoning as we make our way through and around the question and wherever it leads us, and into the third stage, which is sharing one clear, coherent, concluding thought around the conversation that we've had. So that's the conversational technology we are harnessing here today for this conversation. And the guests we have are Bruce Sanguin, Mel Cassidy, Miriam, Elise, and Adam Wilder, each of which are people who are inspired and involved with the psychedelic experience or psychedelic medicine in some way, and each of which have specialized in relationships. This was actually the first recording of a Psychedelic Cafe ever. There are 2 more that are already available on the internet, but this was the first one, and more have been recorded that are yet to be released. And I've waited for this one because I was just waiting for a time that it seemed salient. And now seems to be that time. I mean, relationships are always salient. How our relational interactions unfold in the sort of under our conscious awareness factors that give rise to how we interpret and orient and engage within relationship, be it with conflict or otherwise, is always present and always relevant. But just now it seems to be at a place where it fits, not just in the sense of the value of being in good and healthy relationships and where psychedelics can fit into that, but also as right now we're in a situation where the vast majority of our interactions are being mediated by screens and social media technologies that are negatively impacting our ability to have generative, healthy relational engagement because of the way it messes with our attentional patterns and the reality that we perceive through the filter bubble of what the algorithms of social media deem will keep us most engaged with the platform. Now, that's a bit complex sort of drop of an idea. If you want to check out my thoughts on that, I recently put out a video on YouTube, and I'll leave a link to that in the description to this episode as well. But enough said around that. Ultimately, we're going to have a Psychedelic Cafe today, and it's going to be around the central question of what does the psychedelic experience offer us insofar as the meaning of being in relationship. Before we get into that particular conversation, that Psychedelic Cafe, I want to give a huge thanks to my patrons on Patreon who make this podcast possible, especially the people whose names are listed on the screen here on YouTube. My ability to continue investing in this show with time and with money is bolstered by the enthusiastic and generous voluntary support of my patrons. So thank you so much. None of us could be enjoying this if it wasn't for your help. So thank you. If you're not yet a patron and you'd like to support the show financially, you can do so by heading to patreon.com/JamesWJesso and becoming a patron. Details about what that is are directly on that page. If you'd like to just send me a one-time donation of financial input, you can absolutely do that through PayPal or through some form of cryptocurrency. Details are listed in the description to this episode. That is it for the preamble. Please enjoy this Psychedelic Café here on Adventures Through the Mind. My name's James Jesso. I am somebody who is very interested in psychedelics over the years, and in particular focusing on a question about what and where the psychedelic experience fits inside of living a good life, a happy life, and a life of goodness, I guess. And in that question and in that exploration, increasingly it became obvious that an essential component into that is the relationships, where very much so the relationship is the arena in which all of this personal psychedelic work is playing out. And so it's very important for me to focus on that as a space, as much as the psychedelic experience itself. So that's where I'm coming from in this conversation.
My name's Mel, and I'm a relationship coach. I specialize in working with people who are exploring honest non-monogamy and alternatives to the standard issue of monogamy in our culture. I myself am non-monogamous, and for me, psychedelics have been part of my journey into that. My experiences with LSD and with psilocybin mushrooms in particular have been instrumental in my own journey, and I see them being instrumental in the journeys of a lot of other people as they start to question the things they've taken for granted about the scripts of relating to other human beings. And that's why I'm here, because I'm very passionate about this topic.
I'm Bruce Sanguin. I'm psychotherapist, clinical fellow with the Canadian Association of Marriage and Family Therapy. And I'm also into psychedelics, and my own healing journey came in and through psychedelics, but in the context, I would say, of relationship with my own psychotherapist. So I'm looking forward to speaking to that amongst other things. Thanks.
My name's Miriam Elise, and I'm a licensed acupuncturist as well as a tantric embodiment coach and relationship coach. And my personal experience working with individuals is all about helping them be in relationship with themselves and their bodies. And my personal practice with psychedelics, namely peyote with the Native American traditions, has taught me how to be with stillness and be with myself in a way that really informed me how to coach other people to be in relationship with themselves and with each other.
My name's Adam Wilder. I'm an intimacy and connection coach and trainer. I mainly work with groups. My background, I used to be a clown and a comedian, and I used to go to every kind of psychedelic festival around. I've been a bit through the world of sex positivity and tantra, and I enjoyed it. And I'm now a little bit, I feel, on the other side of that. And I'm really interested in helping people to come to the truth of themselves and to really get in touch with their needs and desires and to be able to communicate that authentically. And for me, the psychedelic experience has been experiences of deep intimacy, such total and complete intimacy. And it's, for me, a way of understanding more about myself and the truth of my nature, which helps me to be more truthful in the way I communicate with others.
Okay, so we're now going to enter into round one, where we each share one clear, coherent thought on this topic, on this question. And we can pass, and we'll go back to you after we pass. I definitely noticed, possibly as an extension of just where I was at in my life, in my development, at the age that I started taking psychedelics, and possibly as an extension of just the reason why I was taking it, of deep exploration into who I am as a person, and what it would take to do, quote, healing, having really no full idea of what that was, that it really shifted me into a lot of deeper, like non-neurotic depth of consideration around myself and why I am who I am, and how I show up with the world impacts other people. And so on like a thinking level, I feel that my explorations into wondering about who I am naturally with psychedelics, I'm very encouraged by psychedelics and guided by my work with psychedelics, really informed me, or eventually evolved into me wondering very much so about like how relationship dynamics work. And so I feel like in that sense, psychedelics really guided me to the same sort of level of non-neurotic depth of consideration and self-examination into not only just myself, but also the relationship as its own thing for examination, and all of what I bring to it as contributing to that, and all of what my partner or other members of relationships bring to it as well.
I think that psychedelics help us break out of the mold of what we've been taught to accept as just given. We live in a culture that is very indoctrinated with what I call patriarchal monogamy. This idea that you have to be with one person, and that in being with one person, you lose your own sense of self-identity. You have to surrender to them, especially when we go into the heteronormative models of women having to be the property of men and so forth. Like, this is where historically we've come from as a Western culture. And working with psychedelics, working with plant medicine, it breaks apart that construct. It takes you into not just an intellectual understanding, but a very palpable experience of, I don't have to limit my relationships to one-on-one human connections, that I have a relationship to the land, to the water, to the air that I breathe. I have a relationship to all these other people that I've never even met. And I think that by communing with that web of greater relating, we're able to undo all the harm that this construct of patriarchal monogamy, patriarchal relating, has done to us in Western culture, and by extension through colonialism to many other cultures as well. And so the potential for psychedelics is not just to expand our possibilities of what a relationship is and how we engage in intimacy with other beings, but it also offers us the opportunity to heal trauma that is not just unique to our own individual selves, but heal the trauma that goes back through many, many generations.
What I think I have to offer here is a perspective and sort of a starting idea for this conversation is that because our hearts are broken in the context of relationship, and usually our earliest relationships where we're hurt by those who are supposed to love us, in the same kind of way, then our healing happens in the context of relationships and of healed intimacy. So I discover in my own journey and in the journey of my clients that where the rubber hits the road in terms of a deep healing, it's always around the capacity for deeper and authentic intimacy. And I think that, this is true whether we're speaking outside the use of psychedelics or with the use of psychedelics. And sometimes I feel as if these sacred medicines are presented as though they are in and of themselves a cure for whatever ails you. But in my own experience, when we come out of the medicine, and Absolutely. We have these profound insights about who we are, and the layers are stripped away, and the core truth about our experience and our own essence comes online, which is beautiful. But as we come out of that into the context of a universe that is ontologically relational. And the question that is put to us by reality, by the universe itself, this interconnected web of relationality, is, how are you doing in your capacity for deep and sustained intimacy? So yeah, that's my opening thought here.
In my experience with with psychedelics, and also with the work that I do around relationships, it's about, like I said in the introduction, it's about being in relationship with yourself and really deeply being as present as possible and as deeply intimate as possible with the present moment. And I believe there's really truly no other way to be in relationship with anybody else than being intimate with the present moment. And in my journey with psychedelics, namely the peyote traditions, which are very structured, you know, the Native American church, that community, it's very much a grounded container so that your mind, your spirit, your psyche can be free to explore within a safe, solid, still place. And what I noticed after my first journey with them, with that tradition, was how much judgment I had on other people and how afraid I was of being seen simultaneously. And it was funny to me. I was 25 years old. It was about 11 years ago. And it's funny to me how those two seem to come together. And when I stopped fearing what other people saw in me, I also stopped seeing all the cracks in other people's facades. And for me, that realization of that projection of the fear of being seen and also picking out what I didn't like in other people was the key point for me that helped me understand how to be in relationship in a way that was truly authentic from my heart, relating to the person as they are, and also letting myself be seen all the way. Because with psychedelics, sometimes there's no chance to hold up your facade. You cannot hold your mask up when you're that deep in the work. There's no personality, there's no self left. It's just you and the abyss, you and the universe. And with relationships, through love, through romance, through sexuality, it also gives us an opportunity to kind of crack that shell, that veneer of everyday reality, and to experience something deeper and wider and more colorful through presence, through the energetic exchange, through breath. And so kundalini energy in yogic or tantric traditions is very similar, if not the same, as, you know, say the DMT experience, or what happens to us when ayahuasca lights us up and these psychedelic consciousnesses move through our bodies, is really similar to what happens when this primal energy wakes up inside of us. And that primal energy in the tantric traditions is said to be stored down in the sex organs. So waking this up has a lot to do with explosive orgasmic potential, only it's not happening in your sex organs, it's happening in your consciousness, in your mind, in your heart, in every part of you. And so that is the bridge between normal, say, human experience or romantic connection, and then being able to make it a bigger experience where you're actually given the opportunity to get beyond yourself and beyond the one-on-one dynamic of you and a partner, and actually touch something greater, touch God, if you will. You know, the tantrics believe that the moment of orgasm is a moment where you're actually in touch with the divine. And many psychedelic experiences also give you this feeling of being in touch with a higher consciousness, with the divine, with light flooding your body. So to me, there's really no distinction between the two. And it's beautiful to weave the past together and really understand what we're talking about and what we're doing consciously when we do that.
I think we're always being told since we're born how we should behave and think and feel, and who we should be in relationship to other things, to the country, to the street, to the family, to each other. And I think we develop very strong mandates about how we should behave, which can actually hold us back from expressing our authentic selves. It's like Gabor Mate talks about this struggle between our need for healthy attachment and our need for authenticity. And I think the psychedelic experience gives us a paradigm shift way of actually understanding where we end and where something else begins, and that maybe the lines are not always that clear, and actually about how we can slide from one thing to the next. So I think it's a powerful way of helping us to expand into our authentic expression of ourselves. How do you know if you're how do you know what's out there if you can't see? You know, if you've never seen beyond the cave, all you know is what's inside the cave. So it expands the map of our psyche and of our territory that we can explore and roll around in as these kind of spiritual mammalian expressions of life, and can help us to reframe the way we relate to each other.
Okay, beautiful. So we're going to move into the open round now. Anyone can speak at any time. There's no need to rush in and speak. When we're speaking about what each other's saying, we're speaking into the group and not to each other. And we will do this for exactly 45 minutes starting now.
I really love the common themes that we all shared in there. A lot of common themes around the authenticity to self, and that dropping into authenticity and the power of that to transform the way that we relate, going from like limited spaces of relationship to expanding the possibilities of how we create intimacy that's real, that's authentic, that's alive, that's awakened. Really lovely to hear that common theme there.
Something that Bruce said really, I guess, lines up with something that I've been holding around this sense that there's something about the psychedelic experience that is the work, and there very much is the work, but it's like what's done in the psychedelic experience is then done somehow, like and that is, I feel like a mistake. Like the work is done when we step out and actually show up into the rest of our lives. And for me, it was a really important part of my journey into becoming a more mature, healthy adult in adult relationships was to recognize how much simply having had the psychedelic experience and doing the personal work on myself about how I show up in relationship to myself, my own stuff, did not equal out to having been healed or having, like completed in any way. That it was still necessary for me to bring what I was learning and what I was healing into my relationships, and that the very me focused, self-focused orientation of my early work was good, but then also was very incomplete in a way that I didn't recognize until sometime later, and that incompleteness was because it lacked a full acknowledgement of how essential the recognition of us as relational beings. I think Bruce had said something about like ontologically in relationship or something like that. That piece is essential for any understanding of how to be with the psychedelic experience in our lives, as regular old humans.
Maybe I'll just speak a little bit to the sort of relational ontology, but do it through a story of I was in a session with my psychedelic psychotherapist, and it's a 4-hour session, and I was using MDMA and fairly high dose LSD. And I set myself the task to build a complete metaphysical system that could be reduced to 2 principles. And so I started into this project, and it seemed like I was doing it for an eternity. I was building this pyramid of meaning. I'd get to the apex, and then I'd realize the flaw in it, and it would all collapse, and I'd start over. And I did this like 5 times. And then when the 5th time, when it finally collapsed, I literally saw what I was doing, what my mind was doing, and it sickened me. I threw up all over my carpet. And then when I got up, I opened my eyes, and there was my therapist. And I said to him, "There is an other." And then astonished, I'd say, "There's an other?" Like, question, there's an other. And then the second thing I said to him was, "I care." And there were my 2 principles. I don't know why I set myself the task of 2 principles. I have no idea. But there were the 2 principles. There is an other, and I care. And I realized that here was my therapist, a human being who cared enough to sit with me for 4 hours right in front of me, but I went off into this cognitive thought process, and I realized that that's what I had done my whole life. That's the way I dealt with heartbreak, was that I went into this place of transcendence and meaning making, and as if meaning had gone missing. But really what I was being shown here was that meaning hasn't gone missing, it's in the relationship. But I was closed off to it because I was afraid of connecting with my therapist. The second principle, after there is another, was I care, and that was heartbreaking. It's like I had to travel on the medicine back across multiple universes to get to this place where I could feel in my bones that I cared. So complete was my dissociation from relationality, my defense coping mechanism. And I realized that these 2 principles that were given me, I didn't generate them. It was like, here you go. Here's a gift from the universe. It wasn't theological. It wasn't metaphysical. It wasn't philosophical. It was ethics. There's an other, and I care. There's an unfathomable mystery of another person's otherness that we'll never understand. So we're left to bridge that otherness with care, which is love. And so that's why I started to realize that for me, it was the recovery of relationality, the recovery of ethics, that I could let the other be completely other and yet bridge it with care. And this was also the realization for me in my own journey anyways, that the psychedelic experience actually was an invitation to return to an a priori relational reality. And so that's kind of how I came to that. For me, it was a gift of the medicine.
This is making me think a lot about how I grew up and what was important to me in terms of staying safe and getting my needs met growing up. And for me, I found that through radical independence. That was my way. As long as they can't feel me, I'm safe. As long as they can't see what's happening behind this facade, then they won't have the power to hurt me. And that took a lot of undoing. It was, it made me strong. I'll say strong. It made me appear strong. People would always say, wow, you're so grounded, you're so peaceful. I said, if you only knew, right? And so the gift, the blessing of working with these plant medicines was to feel the itch on the inside big enough where it started to creep out, and to witness what happened when my inner world started to emerge, seep through the cracks in the mask, if you will. And what happened was I was loved better by those around me. I was known deeper by those around me. I was held with compassion, where before it was like this belief that we are bad and nobody can ever know this thing about ourselves. Nobody can ever see us crumbling, because then they'll abandon us, essentially. That left, it just disappeared when I witnessed myself being tended to when I was ashamed of myself, when I was ashamed of my mess. Not just being tended to, but being loved there. And that's a gift that the medicine has taught me. And that's something that has allowed my relationships to be so much stronger, where I'm not always the caretaker. I'm not always the empathic one, meeting everyone else's needs. I let myself feel the power and the beauty and the core of love, of this medicine just wants me to learn how to love better, how to be loved better, how to love myself, how to love other people better. And all of these smoke screens that I would throw up to try to block people from actually meeting me, from actually knowing me, were actually keeping me from what I wanted the most. And so that's like a lot of my personal journey with the medicine work has been about that, removing illusion. And this may sound funny, but dying gracefully. And the fear is the ego death, right? The fear is that somebody finds you out and that's it. You're discovered, you're demolished, your ego is shattered. And in the tantric traditions, every breath is you take in life, you release life. So inhale, you're receiving, exhale, you're letting go. And training myself to let go, not just of oxygen in my lungs, but letting go of everything that I'm holding on to, that I'm trying to buffer around myself to stay safe. And just, okay, here it is, and there it was, there it went, here it is, and there it went. That's helped my nervous system understand how graceful and how peaceful it can be to not know and to just rest in the mystery. I made a good relationship with the abyss, what I call the abyss, blank space, emptiness, nothingness, the other side, the unknown, the thing that we're all taught to fear. And through making a relationship with that, I feel like it's helped me in my interpersonal relationships just go all in, not fear the ego dissolution that happens when you're seen fully by somebody else, and not be holding on to the self as something so precious that it can't be understood, it can't be known, it can't be touched by anybody else. And with that, it's like the heart just floods open and is actually available for connection.
I think that piece of comfort with the unknown is huge. I really resonated with that experience that Miriam shared, because I think in some ways I came in from a slightly opposite place. There was a time in my life where I had so completely lost my self-relationship that I had fixated on being dependent with others. And it took a huge crisis to wake me up. I had 2 miscarriages within 3 months of each other, and this really threw my life into a lot of chaos. And in that chaos, the thing that helped me find some kind of certainty was working with mushrooms, with psilocybin mushrooms, and using them, taking them into my body, and really just allowing myself to tune into what they were telling me, to tune into that communication, not just from the mushrooms, but what was the world around me trying to communicate to me. Because basically I'd been through so much change in the years previous to that, that I had tried to source all my stability, all my security. Basically, I tried to get all my secure attachment needs met through people and identities and lifestyles that were not actually authentically meeting me. And stepping away from that felt terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying to consider, what if I divorced the person that I'm married to? What if I was to just be single? What would I do? Where would I go? How would I live my life? And my journey with psychedelics was what taught me that it's okay to take that leap, and it's okay to be in a relationship with yourself first and foremost, to put yourself as primary instead of somebody else's needs as primary. And then, a few years later, I went through an experience of microdosing with psilocybin every day for a week. And this was right when I was moving out of the house that my ex and I had shared. And so there was a lot of you're clearing through all the stuff you don't need, literally, like the physical things that you're going to take to the charity store, but also the stuff you don't need inside. And it was incredible to just give myself permission and space to dive into that. I'm going to get rid of all the things I don't need. Like, these things are not me. These things are not serving me. And I don't know that I would have been able to do that and have come out the other side of that feeling as good in my self relationship as I did if I hadn't had the support of psychedelics through that time. And it's one of those pieces where whenever I feel myself falling away from that connection to my authentic relationship, psychedelics, even just remembering what the journeys have taught me, it brings me back into that alignment, that I don't have to fixate on other things to be the source of my emotional security or stability, that I have a source of this within myself. And then that changes the nature of my connections. So instead of connecting with other people because I want to get my security needs met, I'm connecting with other people as a means of celebrating who we are and the connections that exist between us, which I think is very different. And I've definitely experienced it as being a more liberating way of connecting.
I want to speak a little bit about the psychedelics teaching about care and not care. And for me, actually, I had a very powerful experience, which really taught me to love and value myself, because I think, like Mel was saying a bit about, we learn to care for other people before ourselves. And I had a whole set of beliefs with these people I was hanging out with. I should really care what every single person thinks in every moment, and I should be really careful not to upset anyone. And I felt so small and found it so hard to express myself. And I had this deep, my brain was telling me, yeah, this is how you're supposed to feel. My body was like, this is so wrong. This is so wrong. And I came back from a very serious plant medicine ceremony. And one thing it taught me is that I was not loving myself, and I cared way too much. And this was insignificant, these ideas that other people were pushing upon me. And I remember I came back and I immediately changed about 5 things in my flat with my housemates. Like, it was just little things. Like, I didn't have much stuff on my shelf in the fridge, so other people would put their stuff on my shelf. I remember I sat them down. I had a really serious conversation with them. It's like, look, just because I don't put anything on that shelf, it doesn't mean you can't put your stuff. That's my shelf, and I don't want you to put anything on there. And it seems so silly and so small, but it was so wonderful. to recognize that part of myself. And that was the medicine slowly working through. And it built up to an experience with someone from this community. And later what I realized is I didn't even really like anyone in this community. I was trying to get my attachment needs met. I thought they're so cool. And by the way, I'm going to say that it was a very kind of politically correct sex positive community, you know, and I met some really amazing people in there, and I still love them. But I found a part of it to be a bit unhealthy, and the medicine really helped me to realize that. And this one guy was telling me, you should be like this, and you should be like that, and you know, and before the medicine, I'd have just been like, yeah, you're so right. I'm so sorry. I apologize for being here. And after the medicine, I said, you know, look, there you go again, telling me how I should behave to be acceptable to you. Well, I've learned it's more important I live how it's acceptable to me, you know? And I think that the other thing that psychedelics has taught me is it's not like this kind of psychopathic, I'm going to do what I want and screw everyone else like Cartman. You know, it's more, I'm in relationship with the world, and I can sense and I can respond, and I'm not afraid of putting up boundaries. I'm not afraid of bringing a little bit of conflict, because what I really want is the truth and the intimacy of being with you in this moment. Like, let's not pretend. Come on, let's just surrender into the truth of what this is. And to me, that's the deliciousness. And to me, that's what it's like at the peak of these experiences. Miriam was talking about them, where you have no sense of identity. No, you can't resist this thing, right? It's just, you're so in it. It's so intimate. It's like maybe one of the deepest intimacies that I've experienced. And it still fills me with awe and wonder. And I'm grateful for it. I'm really grateful for it.
In the last, the last few things that are being said, I noticed myself really wondering about like where I connect with the things that are being said, you know, like, because the things that were being said all felt so familiar to me, all these experiences, you know, each unique to each person speaking, but part of it feeling very familiar for me. And something that in that sort of trend of familiarity that came up as really being quite personal in my sort of like revelations within psychedelic experiences about myself and why I was in relationships, is that I realized that for whatever myriad of reasons, I came into my adulthood holding a lot of guilt and shame and inadequacy. And that much of the way I conducted myself in the world, and much of the way I responded to the behaviors and the perceptions of other people in my life, was guided by the guilt and the shame wrapped up around inadequacy. And that my work with psychedelics really, not only did it show me that and give me an opportunity to feel it fully, how much of that is hanging around there in showing it to me, but also doing so in a way that felt like, oh yeah, I feel ashamed of myself, and I feel guilty, and I feel inadequate, and that's okay, and I'm still beautiful, and I'm still loved. And helping to clear some of that old stuff out that I've been holding on for a long time, and getting more familiar with like, yeah, I totally feel ashamed of myself and my impulses to do this and to say this and act this way. And I do feel inadequate in these things, but to be able to have a different way that it lands in my experience and in my body and in my relationships, where it's like, it can come up. And I've had deeply viscerally moments where I was so much more ashamed, so much more guilty, so much more inadequate feeling, and I was still loved. So I could be like, oh, okay, I can be with this in a different way. I can be with this in a way that doesn't require me to flinch immediately and go into all my reactive behaviors. And I can take a moment to be like, what? Am I being hypervigilant? Is this the past right now? Is this an old wound that's coming up? Like, did that person really mean what they said? Rather than just immediately going into an unconscious sort of like response to protect myself from the guilt and shame of being inadequate. And that has allowed me to be, I mean, this is sort of like a sometimes I feel like it's a bit of a cliche term at this point, but it allowed me to be more authentic in my relationships, in the sense that I could show up with being like, I feel inadequate, and I'm okay with being seen in the fact that I feel that way, because I'm still loved on at the very least at a cosmic level, if not also in myself, and also still in that other person as well.
What I notice, I just like, and this is kind of just unformed, but one thing I notice is that, like, I'm probably a little older than all of you folks, but there was a time when, 20 years ago, you'd hear all the men talking about, I can't connect with you until I know myself. And so that there was this real commitment to being, getting in touch with oneself. And then I was available to connect with you. And now it's, I hear some of the same, and it makes sense to me that the women in my life are starting to say the same things, like, until I'm centered in myself, I'm not available for relationship. And so that there's this perceived polarization between the individual sovereign self and being deeply relational creatures. But I suspect that polarization stems, like, if we were all loved for the beautiful and radiant beings that we are, like if we came into the world and somebody was saying, oh my God, you're beautiful, and they saw it as their only job to amplify that, so that we could get mirrored back, this polarity wouldn't exist. It exists because of trauma, as if individuality and connection are two separate things, and we somehow got to balance them out. But if we were born into a milieu of love, that love confers sovereignty. Somebody cares and lets us be who we are. And at the same time, we enjoy this unity with the other because we feel safe. And so it's not like either or, it's just like one and the same. And I think this is my experience as well of psychedelics, is like, I'm deeply myself and I'm deeply in love with you. And it's not like either or, it's just like, because of this milieu of love itself, I can be the sovereign individual that I am and feel my deep connection with you at the same time. And like I think you were mentioning, Adam, what Gabor talks about is like the experience, the trauma experience that we had of not being able to be attached and be an individual. So either you collapsed into unity for fear of being individual, or you built a wall and became a hyper individual. But it's all this happens in the absence, or what I've just called failures of love. That's not my term. Ayahuasca gave me that term. So it was failure of love. And then I saw what happened to me in that experience. So I think this is the potential of psychedelics. We can discover that in this milieu of love, out of which everything that comes into being arises, we are also both most deeply ourself and connected. So
I love that archetype and that discussion of love, and it reminds me in the Celtic traditions from Ireland, people would always, and I'm talking about the old fairy stories, the mythology, and people, first of all, they were a lot having sex with each other. They were pretty polyamorous, as it goes. But secondly, they often, with their children, they would give them to other people to be their godparents. They'd go and live with their godparents. And it's like this thing of when you're there with your mother's so afraid of you being hurt that she keeps you really close, right? And she can stop you from individuating. And also it's beautiful to be in that merging. But if you're with your godparent, they're okay if you fall over and hurt your knee and you learn. Or like your grandparents also give you a little bit more space traditionally, because they're not so afraid of you dying. And so I wonder if there's like a certain quality in this love, because the fear from the merging is that you lose yourself. You can't move. You're so reliant on that, the nectar, on that connection. So I like it when people say, they talk about the plant teachers as grandfathers and grandmothers. Like, I like that quality. I like that quality of it.
I really love this this theme we're getting into here, because when Adam was talking before about the experience of setting boundaries with his roommates, I think about, in a lot of the psychedelic sex positive communities, there can be this, I think it's a misunderstanding of what the oneness represents. People have that experience of that transcendental unity, either in an orgasmic state, or through psychedelics, or through psychedelics in an orgasmic state, like combining them all together. And I think in that we feel the dissolution of separateness, which is such a huge piece of Tantra, getting beyond that idea of duality. And yet what I think it might actually be is what Bruce was referring to, this, like, you feel loved, you feel seen. Like, when I'm working with my clients, the number one thing that I hear come up as a unmet need in relationships is that people just don't feel seen. They don't feel like their partner is really understanding them. And yet when they are in an intimate experience, there is that sense of, I feel seen and I feel loved unconditionally. And so psychedelics can give us a glimpse, give us a taste of that. But that's, I think, different from that, the way that a lot of people understand oneness. I've seen a lot of people approach that as like, you're not allowed to have any boundaries. But for me, the experience has been that it has actually empowered me to have those boundaries. And the key part of that is the integration process. We have that unity experience when we're in communion with psychedelic medicines. And then we go back to this other reality. and how do we integrate that process? Like James was saying, like the integration piece is huge. And knowing where our boundaries are, that's where we get to become sovereign beings. And I agree with Bruce. Like, I don't think we can actually really be in relationship until we know where our own boundaries are, until we are our own sovereign beings, because then we know who we are bringing into that unity. So we know who we are, who it is that we are engaging from, so to speak.
I'm noticing two questions coming to mind. And one question is just remembering the title of an article I read recently, which was, "Do psychedelics make you polyamorous?" And then the other question that I have is, we're talking a lot about psychedelics and intimacy, psychedelics and self-love. But what about psychedelics and eroticism, psychedelics and sex with other humans at the same time? Those are two questions that I just realize I'm holding right now.
I would love to share a little bit on that. So coming from the Native American peyote traditions, which are very masculine, I'll say, cover your shoulders, sit like this, don't talk, stay up, keep your eyes open, praying for 15 hours on your knees. My femininity, my sensuality had to be shielded, because medicines open you up and wake this thing up in you that makes you want to connect even more. They tend to. And so it's taught that that's dangerous. That desire, that arousal can be dangerous, because we're trying to focus here, we're trying to pray. And I honor that, I respect that. And yet it definitely shut down a lot of who I am. And I had to work with like, okay, how can I be my full self and respect these traditions? When I started working with ayahuasca, this was about 8 years into my work with peyote. I was monogamous with peyote. That's what I said. I'm like, I'm doing this thing with this medicine. Grandpa and me are so we're tight, you know. And finally, I felt like I had gone deep enough with that medicine that I was ready to call in the feminine more in my personal medicine work. And so I sat with ayahuasca. Honestly, that first ceremony is kind of all I ever needed. Like, meaning I've done many since, and that first ceremony contained the whole universe for me, and everything since then was like different pockets of the universe, but that first one was like everything. And what I found was being reintroduced to myself and my spirit lineage, and being reintroduced to my body and my breath as ecstatic, sensual, erotic a being, that it's okay to move with that, because there's something about that medicine has a serpentine quality with it, that you feel it through your body. My first experience with ayahuasca, the first half hour or hour, who knows how long, I was having rolling orgasms, energy orgasms, every time I'd breathe. Oh my God. And my mind is like, is this okay? Is this okay? Is anyone watching? Am I not being spiritual? Like, am I being inappropriate by letting this, just allowing this energy to move through me? Because again, I had been taught that this is ceremony and this is your personal life. Separate the two. This is ceremony. This is your sexuality. You're not supposed to pray with that intact. And ayahuasca showed me something very different. And it was like saying yes to my feminine energy and saying yes to this sensuality that was moving through me. So I was on the bed, our little mats, with this crystal on my heart, and my spine was arching, and I was breathing, and every time I would inhale, I felt like everything unfurling and unfolding. And as my spine was arching, this crystal that was on my heart, this long thing, slowly was sliding down. I didn't realize it. I'm like, why? Wow. Like, what is feeling so amazing? And I looked down and I was like, oh my God, this whole time I thought it was just energy, but this crystal had kind of slid down. And so I lifted it back up to my heart. It happened like 3 more times where I was just in the zone so much that my body was just doing this thing. It kept sliding down. And I decided to just, okay, that's what the medicine wants me to do. That's where I'm going to go with it. And that's surrender to my own erotic experience in that moment. And learning how to be with everything that I'd cultivated through the kind of more stoic peyote tradition, and like holding myself and holding myself back. So honoring and not leaking, while allowing myself to fully experience whatever was moving through me without needing to make it about the sexy shaman or like the person next to me or like what anybody else is, or the helpers walking around seeing me. I'm just like, you know what? This is my experience. This is just what I'm going through right now. And being in that fully, I think gave me like a green light inside to kind of merge what I hold as spirituality. When you're connected to the other realms through a plant medicine, it's a form of spirituality, with sexuality, and help me kind of take the layers of shame off it just by being fully present in that experience and being like, well, let me check in with myself. Does this feel okay? Yes. The only thing that might not feel okay is the fear of other people projecting onto me what they might see. And then realizing, well, that's their healing. That's their work. So here I am, allowing myself to be fully in my orgasmic experience and just trusting that everyone's going to be able to take care of themselves, whatever that brings up for them. And I think when I was younger or newer on my path, I was so concerned with creating any reaction in anybody. I didn't want to create any negative reaction with how I am, how I communicate, how I, just exude energy. I didn't want to negatively impact other people. And learning how to both hold it and exude it within my kind of bubble really helps me in the work that I do, definitely helps me in the work that I do, meaning not leaking energy and not taking on leaky energy, and being a container for this life force to flow through. And also in my personal life, in my, you know, romantic relationship, learning how to just be with whatever is without needing to look at it from an external perspective, you know. And to me, like, even way before I worked with ayahuasca, I would have psychedelic experiences through orgasm, through lovemaking. It would just wake up this part of me that it was like an ayahuasca experience. And then working with the medicine seemed like such a clear doorway into that world that I had been kind of knocking on the door. I'm like, okay, I see you, I'm here, and then I'm back in my body. And working with ayahuasca was like 5 hours of being fully through the door, walking through the gate in this other world, in this other realm. And then learning how to be embodied, sensually embodied, while I'm in the spirit realm was so healing to me, and healing to the shame that I had around in my childhood around being too sexual, too overtly sexual. It helped me really understand why orgasm and spirit, it's like they say, like, you go deep enough into the path of sexual embodiment, sexuality, eventually you're going to have a spiritual experience. You go deep enough into the path of God, spirituality, eventually you're going to have an erotic experience, meaning an arousing experience, an experience of the Holy Spirit, aka kundalini, moving through you in a way that it's lighting you up and electrifying your senses. And so the fact that I see these on the continuum, working with the plant medicine, namely ayahuasca, really helped me understand how those pieces fit together.
I'm just thinking, you know, the lockdown, there's been very few psychedelic orgies recently, and how many people are just waiting to be able to go out and express themselves in that way again. And I love hearing you talk about eroticism and expression like that, Miriam. And I think it's such an authentic expression of the self when you can be so present with your desires and your expressions, and be somewhere where you have permission to really, where people really see that and accept that. It can be tremendously healing and powerful and life affirming. And most people I know who've done a lot of psychedelics have dabbled in some form of you know, non-conformist sexual kind of practices. What do you think, James?
I wonder about that. I wonder, like, do psychedelics make you polyamorous? And I think there's a question, like, is somebody who's more likely to be polyamorous more likely to take psychedelics? Or does it make you more likely to be polyamorous? Or do psychedelics, on a fundamental level, change our tendencies, cultural tendencies towards monogamy? Or do psychedelics take and break down the walls of guilt and shame and sort of reactivity and I think Bruce's term is false self, although I apologize if I've gotten that wrong. And then underneath, there's the realization that one has always been polyamorous, or is just more open to different types of sexual experiences. So I wonder if it's like, is it like chicken or the egg, as to whether or not psychedelics make people more likely to want to have wild, interesting, dynamic experiences, or people who are more likely to want to have wild, interesting, dynamic experiences are more likely to take psychedelics?
Yes,
Yeah, I mean,
is the answer.
yes, yeah. I mean, I may be the only polyamorous person on this panel. I don't know, but it may be a function of age. But like, I'm one of those people who like experience that I found a soulmate, and had no interest actually in, I mean, like, this is my beloved. And that was before I started into the psychedelic path, and I've done a lot of psychedelics since, and it hasn't aroused in me the desire to be polyamorous. So, the mind is a powerful thing, like, and I don't think psychedelics override the mind necessarily. I've been with people who, have taken 600 micrograms of LSD, and they're just holding a conversation like this. And so I'm not sure that psychedelics, that's an interesting conversation in itself. Mm-hmm. What is the interaction between, quote unquote, our minds and the psychedelic substance? Obviously psychedelics just open us to what's already there. My experiences of many psychedelic journeys has not been that I've felt like I want to be polyamorous.
I think maybe I'll jump back in, and like, I have had a history of being polyamorous, and I think my psychedelic exploration and my exploration of different relational organizing structures sort of were hand in hand with each other. And I think that psychedelics helped me be more radical in the choices that I was making, and in that more likely towards polyamory. But I think that was something I was already interested in and already wanting to go towards. And psychedelics maybe just helped me own it more. But it was also a very particular psychedelic experience I had with psilocybin that showed me that at one point I realized, oh, I have great polyamorous relationships right now. I feel sexually satisfied in a very dynamic and interesting multitude of ways with different people, and it's all going really well, and I have a great community, and everyone's very open and honest, and there's no shame in talking about. But it was just like everything that 10 years ago I was like, this is what I want. And I was like in this psilocybin experience, and I'm like, yes, wow. And yet I'm still really lonely. And it was like the term that came into my mind was like, there's a deeper loneliness. And I realized that it was a deeper loneliness that also included the fact of feeling like, oh, I'm also connected to the universe, and I'm never truly alone because I'm an expression of the fabric of love that animates all of life. But in between that and everything else that I had in my 3D life, there was this loneliness. And I realized at that point that for a long time I had been talking about how I was sort of situationally polyamorous, and I was interested in exploring a monogamous relationship if it, turned out to feel right, and blah, blah, blah. Where I realized at some point I was like, no, I'm ready now. I realize that insofar as how I envision my life moving forward with a relationship, I want a partner that is with me day in and day out until the days that we die. It's somebody who is going to fundamentally change me. I mean this in a contextual to myself, not necessarily comparative to other people's strength of relationships, but a relationship that I will never recover from its death and will never want to. If a relationship where when my partner dies, I will never recover, and I won't want to. A relationship with somebody who I can trust will be there in the dying time, in the aging time, assuming that we're both lucky enough to get that far in being human, and that I realized that the way I was conducting myself with my polyamory would never give that to me. And that there was a way I felt on a deeper level call to participate in monogamy that could bring that to me, assuming that, again, if I found the right person and engage myself in that way. And it was a psilocybin experience that said, hey, it's there now. You're really ready. you're really ready to ask for this, because I was finally ready to feel where that loneliness was, now that I had done all this cool work and getting everything else sort of set up. And that very much set the stage for me entering into a relationship that has become monogamous and feels amazing. And I sort of echoing Bruce, I feel no desire. I mean, I feel desire all the time to have sex with all sorts of people, but like, I have no real full desire to ever be intimate with anyone other than her. And it was very much psychedelics, psilocybin, that helped me see that was where I was at, what I was ready for.
Hmm.
And I would guess that the journey that you took to get there, James, helped to process through the kinds of internalized shame around that, like what you just said
Yes.
around that I feel desire for other people, but I have no desire to act on that. I think that's huge. For a lot of people who never question monogamy, there remains a lot of internalized shame around our very natural libido and desires and experience. And going back to what Miriam was saying, like all that internalized shame and the externalized shame that we experience from other people when we are expressing our sexuality and our sensuality. I mean, in terms of the question, does psychedelics make you polyamorous? I just laugh every time I think about that. Like they don't make you anything other than who you fundamentally are. And even the word polyamorous, I mean, that's a label to describe a certain way of doing relationships. Are we fundamentally wired for fidelity or promiscuity? I don't know the answers to that. But I think that psychedelics can help. They can help anybody who is wanting to challenge the construct of anything that they were raised with. And so when I talk about patriarchal monogamy, I say, look, there's other kinds of monogamy that are great. There's an egalitarian kind of monogamy where you aren't subscribing to like patriarchal rules and structure. And it sounds like that's the point at which you're arriving at, James, which is beautiful. And I think that, I've seen it in my clients, like a lot of people will come against this struggle where they do want to be polyamorous. They do want to explore relationships in a different way, whether that's communal living or having an extended poly family or being relationship anarchists or doing monogamy in a different way. But they run up against this wall of the old programming, of the old way of doing things that is just so deeply habituated and that is reinforced by popular culture. And when they run up against that wall, the most powerful tool in anybody's toolkit to combat that is to work with psychedelics, to examine, like, well, what are my core beliefs that are active here? What is the shame that I'm feeling around my attractions? What is it that I actually deeply want? And on the counterpoint to that, I do see a lot of psychedelic erotic confusion that comes up in these communities where people will go to places like tantra festivals or music festivals, and they'll have incredible sexual experiences that may or may not involve psychedelics. And there is confusion around the meaning of the experience. So I think back to an experience that I had in a music festival. I was on a beautiful medley of different psychedelics. It was an incredible night for me. I suffer from chronic pain, and that night I had no pain in my body for the first time in years. And I was like slow dancing with a tree in the forest. It was at Shambhala, and it was beautiful. And then I ended up having a sexual experience with a friend of mine who was there. That to this day is one of the most powerful sexual experiences I've had. And he was on psychedelics as well, and it was very beautiful to get to know my friend in that different way. But that experience is meaningless in terms of what it means about our connection, right? He's still a friend, but he's not someone that I have ever pursued as a romantic interest or as anything beyond that. And it was so interesting to sit with the reality that here was this powerful experience that both of us could acknowledge was deep and transformative. And that feeling of we are communing not only with our own erotic bodies but each other's erotic bodies, and like the eroticness of the whole universe. And yet that's the totality of it. We don't have to turn that experience into meaning anything else. And I see that that's not a way that most people will integrate it. I see a lot of relationships appear from festivals, and people have that intimate experience and they become intoxicated with it. And especially when psychedelics are involved, there's an added layer of confusion, because we do feel that unity, we do feel that oneness, we do feel suddenly our attachment needs are being met in our experience with this person, supported through the psychedelics. And yet when we come off of the psychedelic journey, what is there actually remaining between the two people or three people or however many people? So like I've had incredible experiences of using psychedelics in my own exploration of my sexuality, my eroticism, and my relationships, and I remain very cautious about it, because I think that there's a wide margin of error in terms of how we integrate from those experiences. And part of what I hope to see happen in the world is more tools for people to be able to integrate authentically and understand their experiences better.
Yeah, I'm loving this conversation. The thing that keeps coming up for me is I personally am monogamous. That feels best to me. I've explored, I've experimented, but and I'm curious what you guys think about this analogy, where seeking new psychedelic experiences for the rush that it gives you, for the new insight, for the maybe you had a whole experience last time, but you want to learn this piece, or you have a new intention, you want something more. It's similar to polyamory. You're kind of, you're engaging with different energies, you're bringing in more, when say somebody might be in the phase of integration, you're seeking to have a new experience. And monogamy is more like an extended integration, where you're taking this one full experience and integrating it, growing deeper into it for your whole life or for a decade or two. And I think about, I'll say, a personal judgment that I have, that I've seen to be true a lot of times, not always, within polyamory communities, is this seeking, this high, this addiction to falling in love. And that feeling of it's new, and this new thing with this one person. If it isn't that high, then that means that it's not valuable anymore. It's losing traction in my heart, right? And so they seek something else. They want to feel alive. They want to keep that high. They want to keep that engagement, keep that aliveness that you feel when you're newly attracted and engaging with somebody. As opposed to the way that I've seen really healthy long-term monogamous relationships, where it's like that one ayahuasca experience I was talking about. I'm like, that could have been it. That one experience could have been all that I needed from any plant medicine in my whole life. It was that full. It was that whole. And when you find that person, that soulmate, if you will, that does that for you, that wakes you up in that way, that connects to you in those ways that are essential to your being, to your spirit. Your whole life together can be an extended integration, where you're still every moment together is a deepening and a new dynamic. And if you notice yourself getting stuck in patterns, kind of losing the essence of what the journey was, you get stuck in these patterns, watching yourself and choosing to break out of them and choosing to relate differently. It's like how we are able to stay in relationship with each other and with ourselves, and that we're witnessing where we're becoming stagnant and where we're getting into these kind of holding patterns. We're used to relating a certain way. We're used to the other person responding to us a certain way. And I find that that's what tends to end relationships, or what tends to grow that boredom in long-term relationships, is we're just kind of stuck being this person for each other. And something that I find with psychedelics, I do believe it's like a gateway to polyamory. I'll say that much. What I find with that is that it teaches our brains how to be more plastic, neuroplasticity. It teaches us how to say, okay, I'm in this dynamic. We've been together for 5 years. We have our patterns, and I'm going to choose to relate differently so that I'm not perpetuating the same story, not perpetuating the same feeling that I have. And it takes a lot of courage and just energy to break out of old patterns and to choose to be a different way with somebody, especially if they're continuing to mirror the old pattern. But for me, psychedelics have helped me learn how to choose how I want my mind to interact with the world around me. And it's if we're all kind of masters behind the control board, the motherboard of our brain, of our psyche, psychedelics is like a training course if you work with it in the right way, of what the buttons do, how to go left, how to go right, how to move forward. Whereas before, it's kind of, I felt like a kid sitting behind the machine of my brain, where my brain was just firing. I'm like, push the button, make it stop having those thoughts, stop projecting. So I don't know how to do this. And psychedelics, through working with intense discomfort and fear and pain that has arisen in my experience with psychedelics, has taught me how to breathe, how to hold my mind in the right way, where I'm working with it to create what I want to create. And in relationship, that's like the biggest takeaway that I have from working with psychedelics.
I'm going to come in here with a timekeeping comment here, although Miriam did invite some feedback on her thoughts on polyamory and psychedelic use. So I'll create a space now for anyone who wants to speak to that, and then we're going to close into the final round.
I just wanted to say, in response to the piece about polyamory, there's a big difference between polyfuckery and polyamory. And I think that a lot of people, every single person in this world has trauma, right? We've all had overwhelming experiences, and we all have ways of adapting to that. And, I see that a lot of the ways we seek out relationships can be strategies for how we band-aid our trauma. And so for some people who are in that space of addicted to the new relationship energy, which I've seen as well, and I also have grave concerns about it, I see it as this is a way that they're attempting to get their secure attachment needs met, is by outsourcing it. But because there hasn't been the integration work in their own self relationship, right? It starts with that self relationship. They're going from one thing to the next instead of staying with those relationships. I know people who are polyamorous who've been in 10, 20, 30-year long relationships that are polyamorous. And so I think that polyamory can offer people a way to meet those secure attachment needs. The problem that we face is that there isn't enough context for understanding the nuances and the differences and how that shadow side can find itself being expressed, which I think ends up doing a lot of harm in a lot of those communities. So that's just my reflections on there, because I agree with a lot of what you said there, and the potential of being able to grow and integrate together doesn't have to be limited to integrating with one person. My longest term relationships are with some of my friends who are like family to me. And yes, we've had dating relationships, and yes, we've done a lot of psychedelics together, and now we are platonic friends. And there is an incredible amount of secure attachment that comes from those friendships. So I don't think that we need to exclusively find that being met through our romantic relationships. And that is a journey that I found through my own personal journey, and that has been supported by the messages I've received in my psychedelic experiences.
So just a extra space here if Adam or Bruce want to weigh in on that before we go into our closing circle.
I want to say, for me, my biggest growth in relationship has come from being in a more or less monogamous relationship. And what I mean by that is we've had some erotic experiences in groups, but we are, together, and we're committed. And there's something really intimate for me and sacred about like that communion with the plant teachers. The older I get and the more I've been doing psychedelics, the more I'm actually into the idea of marriage, because I think this idea that you're going to be safe, you're in this sacred bond with someone, and it becomes a microcosm of the universe, recreating and reinventing itself. And that's something I saw in the plant medicine, and touches me really deeply. When you're committed with someone, you can't just run away when you're upset, when you're angry. You have to be there and integrate it and be with that person. That's not exclusive to a monogamous relationship, I have to say, but for me, it's where I find my greatest growth. For me, that maybe this is my summing thought as well, James, coming a bit early, but the power of psychedelics is to bring us more into our sovereignty. And that might mean, yeah, I'm actually really polyamorous, or I'm really monogamous, or I'm, or maybe I am this now and then I'm going to be that, and that's totally okay. And I love that. And the power of psychedelics is to protect us when other people go, yeah, you know what? Polyamory is really the best thing, and you should be like that. Otherwise, you're not really spiritual. You're not a true psychonaut. Oh, you should really be into marriage. Otherwise, you're not a real person. And that's what I love about it, is everyone coming into their individual embodied sovereignty.
Yeah, beautiful. And I just want to say I really appreciate the depth of maturity and the perspectives that have been talked and we've been in conversation around. So deep gratitude. I know this isn't over, but I just want to weigh in on this piece.
Okay, so we'll enter our final round here, and which is that we're each going to share one clear, coherent, concluding thought from our conversation, our cafe today. And I'll start, and we'll do the same order as we did earlier, which was myself, Mel, Bruce, Miriam, Adam. And I think what's really clear and coherent concluding thought for me today is less about the content and more about the sense of feeling very fortunate that there are people in the world who are doing the kind of like deep thinking and lifestyle engagement with psychedelics and in relationship in a way that can bring forth this kind of knowledge to the larger sphere. And I feel, I mean, this is about a concluding thought, not so much about just expressions of gratitude, but that is my concluding thought right now, is that I'm just feeling a lot of gratitude for having had the opportunity to participate in this. I also want to encourage each of you not to have to conclude with that, but to actually bring a concluded thought. That's what's really salient for me.
I think I need a bit more time to formulate my thoughts. I'm going to pass right now.
What's coming to my mind is there's been a lot of conversation about sort of attachment and when we form relationships, whether under the influence of psychedelics or not, based on a way of unconsciously compensating for the emotional deficit for those needs we didn't get met. And I my opening statement was our hearts are broken in relationship, given that those who were responsible and in charge of loving us failed to do so. And so our hearts are healed in relationship. So it's relationships are where I think the deep healing happens, whether with a professional or with friends or extended community. But I think maybe more than anything else, and this is also what comes up on psychedelics for me. There have been wonderful transcendent experience, unitive experiences, non-dual, and that's all been great. But for me, it's taken me down into my suffering. That's where I spent most of my time. And it's taught me that the willingness to grieve over and over and over again, to suffer what's mine to suffer, not once and for all, but as an ongoing practice throughout life is the best assurance against moving into relationships out of an unconscious compensation for what I didn't get. In other words, if I can suffer and own that nobody's ever going to make that up again. That was like a one-time thing. All there is to do is to grieve that and suffer it, and you'll be okay. Just feel it. And then we can consciously come back in intimate relationships without that unconscious sort of leaky, take care of me, nurture me, I'm helpless energy. So my concluding thought is like the life practice for me has been the willingness to grieve as an ongoing way of orienting in the world.
In conclusion, what I'm really taking from this conversation and from what all you guys have shared is how much the world within us and the way that we dig ourselves deep inward matches how we experience the world outside of us. And it's really not about monogamy or polyamory. It's about how much can you experience, how much of yourself can you experience reflected in one other being or a bunch of other people, depending on what your choice is. And both ways allow for this fulfillment of self, essentially, of being seen, being known, being met. And I know that the desire to let others in, for me, was a choice that I made fully only once I really explored myself, because I finally understood what I was letting them into. And so working with psychedelics helped me explore myself in that way. And it helped me realize that it was worth it, to not withhold what I was afraid of, the unknown. And there's so much joy that can come from relating from a place of, I have nothing to lose, because I'm intimate with the unknown. So therefore, there's nothing that can be taken from me. There's nothing I'm trying to hide from. And with the conversation, we wove so many different topics together, and none of them seem separate. Like right at this moment, monogamy and polyamory don't seem different to me. It's just different ways of relating. Of course, there's different details of how you exactly relate, but you can go all the way with either one, or hold back all the way with either one. And of course, the myriad of other relationship dynamics. I think in the deeper that you go inside yourself, the more every relationship you have starts to echo the same truth. It starts to feel similar, maybe not overtly romantic or physical, but it still carries that same quality of depth and fulfillment that we can get from our most intimate relationships.
I'm feeling moved from hearing everyone speaking. And what touches me the most are the talking about grief, or the talking about what has been difficult, the difficult realizations, the ones that go against the grain, the ones that are really feel like they're a real take courage and a real sense of individuation to process and to speak. And what I'm taking away from this is this feeling of opening to others, and allowing myself to be moved by what others say and speak, and that feels just so important, so alive. And that's the heart of intimacy that can be experienced with ourselves and with each other.
I find myself thinking back to the original question of what does the psychedelic experience offer us insofar as the meaning of being in relationship, and um, pulling into the common threads and what we've all shared. I hear this piece of integration and authenticity and being present, and thinking about how much psychedelics have allowed me in my own personal journey to reconnect to my own personal relationship and integrate my experiences of other relationships to be able to move forward as a more complete whole human being who can sit with the internal dichotomies that I experience and still relate from there. I think the journey of that, I see it as being a common thread for a lot of people. And I think that's what the psychedelic experiences seem to be able to offer us, is that ability to process through our internalized shame, to let go of the shame around grief, that we can sit with what is real for us and not feel like we have to suppress that or change it for the sake of others. And and then I find myself thinking, well, what if this question was turned around? And what if we looked at what does being in relationship offer us in our psychedelic experience? And I really love that we get to have these conversations in community, and that this community continues to grow, of people who are looking at the relationships between relating and psychedelics. And for me, that being able to integrate my psychedelic experiences with the people I'm in relationship with has been huge. And yeah, that's the question that I feel like comes out of this for me.
At risk of breaking my own rules and adding a concluding thought at the end here, I realize I actually had one. I should have maybe just passed the beginning, which is that looking back at who I was and what my priorities were before taking psychedelics and afterwards, it's difficult to say how much of it is simply just growing up, because it has been, like I started taking psychedelics when I was 16. I started taking it very intensely in my early 20s. I started taking it from what I, in my own experience, consider to be a more mature way, or a more focused way, we'll say, in my mid 20s. So it's like these are foundational times for stepping into adulthood. So it's hard for me to say, but if I look at it, I see that one noticeable difference is that on the other side of all my psychedelic work, I realized that that feeling and letting myself feel and letting myself be seen in my feelings, whether they be painful or positive, painful or pleasant, and that focusing on the cultivation of intimacy and relationships that allow those feelings to feel full and to witness them in others, as being really important, is very palpable for me now, and it wasn't before I started taking psychedelics. And so it could just be a part of growing up, but I would see that realizing that, like, vulnerability, intimacy, authenticity, and caring, and that all being in relationship have become strong priorities in my life. And I track the realization of that to many of my psychedelic experiences. Okay, so that's the closure. Thank you for letting me take the last word. If anyone here would like to let the listeners know where we can find out more about your work, social media handles, now would be a good time to just like drop those into the conversation.
Yeah, you can find me at radicalrelationshipcoaching.ca. On social media, look for me at Radical Relating on Instagram, Facebook. I don't tweet, but I have a Twitter account. You can follow it. Yeah, those are usually the best ways to get a hold of me.
I'm at togetherness.com, and I've got a course coming up called Embodied Sovereignty, which relates to what we've been talking about today. You can find me there.
Bruce Sanguin sanguin.ca.
And I'm at miriamelise.com. That's MIRIAMELYSE.com. And my social media is Pleasure as Medicine. And that's on Instagram. You can find me there. I also have a Facebook group called Pleasure as Medicine.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate you all being here.
Thank
Thanks,
you so much.
Great conversation.
And cut. Okay, thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this Psychedelic Cafe, this episode of Adventures Through the Mind. If you did like it, please share it on the social media platform of your choice. The show here does not it doesn't try to surf the algorithms. I don't try to create content that's on trending, that sort of catches people's attention in a way that sort of dominates, hijacks their limbic system and pulls them into engagement almost forcefully to some degree, like a lot of content does, because that is the only way it gets to the top of most people's newsfeed, unless you hit follow first on Facebook or hit the notification bell on YouTube or whatever. I don't do that because I think that's just not what I'm about. So you sharing it on social media helps because the algorithms aren't going to support the content. So you doing that would be awesome. So thank you for sharing on social media. If you're not on social media, good for you. Wow. Awesome. I'm doing my best to stay away from it as well. You can share it however you need to and however it feels most inspiring to do so. If you'd like to stay in contact with me, you can follow me on social media at James W. Jesso, but you can also sign up for my newsletter, which I put out every few months. It gives you an update on what I've been doing and all the rest. And the content I've been producing, so it doesn't spam your inbox, but it does show up and you don't have to go and be involved on any social media platforms to get the links to what I'm doing. I mean, except for your email client, which may or may not be problematic for you. I don't know. So yeah, so all in all, thank you so much for being a part of the show. Thank you for listening. And I hope that the conversation that you got to experience here today, both at the content level and the process level, inspires you to engage your relationships in a healthier and more constructive way. All right, a little interruption here, a little post-production interruption here at the end of the podcast. As you can tell, the video and the sound quality is totally different. I'm just recording this on my laptop. I wanted to add this in, which is that if you are interested in hearing my thoughts on the connection between psilocybin and our relationships, I have a whole lecture on the topic that was actually given at the House of Togetherness, which is a venue that was run or directed by Adam Wilder in London, England. So that is available on jameswjesso.com. It's called Psilocybin and Connection, and I've also linked it in the description to this episode. So check that out. And now back to the main recordings for this podcast. If you'd like to support the show financially, you can do so by heading to patreon.com/JamesWjesso and becoming a patron, or by leaving a one-time donation either through PayPal or cryptocurrency. Links are in the description. Thanks so much for tuning in. My name is James W. Jesso. This is Adventures to the Mind. I'll see you on the next one. Take care. Great. Okay, so that's Psychedelic Cafe number 1.
Woo!
Yay! Awesome.